The champagne glass didn't shatter. I set it down quietly, precisely. Around me, the garden of my own estate was drowning in white roses and gold ribbons, all paid for by me. My sister Brooke stood at the head table, hand on her belly. She didn't look ashamed, she looked triumphant. "It is Tyler's," she announced. "Destiny's late husband is the father, and this baby deserves his estate." I looked at my parents. They weren't shocked, they were nodding. They knew the ambush was perfect. Comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. 45 minutes earlier, I had been standing at the edge of that same patio writing a check for $12,000 to a caterer who specialized in gold leaf macarons. The theme was white and gold. It was mandatory. My mother, Patricia, had touched my arm, her manicured nails digging into my skin just enough to hurt. "Fix your face, Destiny," she had whispered. "You look like a funeral. This is a celebration." I remember staring at the ink drying on the check. I wasn't a guest at this party, I was the sponsor. And now, standing amidst the ruins of my own generosity, listening to my sister claim my dead husband's legacy for herself, the transaction was finally over. I didn't scream. I didn't flip the table, that would have been emotional, and emotions are messy. Business is clean. I walked over to the crystal bowl near the entrance where I had placed the catering. "Check for the event coordinator." My father Thomas took a step toward me, his face arranging itself into a mask of stern authority. "Destiny, be reasonable," he started. I picked up the check. I held his gaze. I tore the paper in half, then in quarters. The sound was sharp, like a bone snapping in a quiet room. I dropped the confetti onto the pristine white tablecloth. Then I turned around and walked out of the garden, past the stunned guests, past the balloon archway and into the main house. I went straight to the guest wing. That was where I lived. Despite owning the deed to this $6 million lakeside estate, despite paying for the renovations, the taxes and the landscaping, I had allowed my parents to occupy the master suite while I stayed in the converted garage. I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop. The screen glowed to life, illuminating the dark room. I didn't feel the crushing weight of grief I expected. I felt light. I felt the cold, sharp clarity of an auditor finally closing the books on a failing subsidiary. I logged into my primary banking portal. The interface was familiar, a digital map of my own exploitation. I scrolled to the recurring transfers tab. It was an impressive list. At the top was a monthly transfer labeled parental support, $2,800. It was sent on the first of every month to ensure my father didn't have to dip into his pension for trivial things like groceries or utilities. I hovered the cursor over the trash icon. I didn't hesitate. Click cancelled. Next was the auto pay for the lease on a white Range Rover, Brooke's car. She had told me she needed it for her image as an influencer even though her follower count hadn't moved in 3 years. $950 a month. Click cancelled. Then the country club membership fees for Thomas, $600. Click cancelled. The premium health insurance policy for Patricia. Click cancelled. The utility bills for the main house. Click cancelled. I worked with the speed and precision of a surgeon. Within 4 minutes, I had dismantled the entire financial infrastructure that kept my family comfortable. I froze the credit cards linked to my account that my mother carried in her purse. I changed the passwords to the streaming services. I revoked the authorized user status on the gas cards. When I closed the laptop, the silence in the room felt different. It wasn't the silence of submission anymore. It was the silence of a vault door closing. They thought they were negotiating for an inheritance. They didn't realize they had just breached the contract of their own survival. This wasn't revenge, it was a market correction, and the market had just crashed. The lakeside estate wasn't just a house, it was a resurrection. 7 years ago, my parents had driven this property into the ground. They had leveraged it to fund a series of bad investments and a lifestyle they couldn't afford, leaving the structure rotting and the bank threatening foreclosure. It was Tyler who saw the bones of something beautiful underneath the neglect. He was an architect, a visionary who could look at a crumbling facade and see a palace. We bought the deed from the bank just days before the auction using every cent of our combined savings. Then we spent 3 years rebuilding it plank by plank, stone by stone. It was Tyler's masterpiece, and when it was finished, I let my parents move back into the master suite. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself it was what a good daughter did. But sitting in the dark of my guest wing office, the blue light of the laptop illuminating my hands, I finally admitted the truth. It wasn't kindness. It was a transaction. For decades, I had been caught in a psychological trap, a cycle of normalized cruelty that I had mistaken for family dynamics. I had been conditioned to believe that my value was entirely dependent on my utility. If I paid the bills, I was tolerated. If I renovated the house, I was allowed to stay. If I funded Brooke's lifestyle, I was a good sister. I had been paying a subscription fee for love, but I never realized that the service had been cancelled years ago. They had normalized the extraction of my resources to the point where I felt guilty for setting boundaries while they felt entitled to cross them. It was a classic system, clinical in its design. Brooke was the golden child. To my parents, she wasn't a separate person. She was an extension of their own vanity. She was the shiny object they could show off, the projection of the youth and success they felt they deserved. Her failures were externalized, blamed on the world, while her existence was celebrated. I was the utility, I was the scapegoat. My role was to provide the fuel that kept their engine running. I was the mechanic in the pit crew covered in grease while they stood on the podium spraying champagne. They didn't love me, they loved the lifestyle I provided. Tyler had seen it. He had warned me 2 years ago, sitting on the dock of this very lake, his hand warm over mine. They don't love you, Destiny, he had said, his voice sad but firm. They love what you do for them. If you stopped paying, they would stop pretending. I had argued with him then, I had defended them. I had called him cynical, but looking at the empty space on the other side of the bed, I realized he was right. He had always been right. The baby shower downstairs had gone quiet. I could hear the murmur of confused guests leaving, the heavy thud of car doors closing. The party was over. My parents and Brooke were likely huddled in the kitchen, spinning a narrative of victimhood, probably telling themselves that I was having a mental breakdown, that I would come crawling back with an apology and a check by morning. They were wrong. The architect was gone and the builder had just walked off the job. The foundation they stood on was mine, and I was done supporting the weight of people who would crush me to build themselves up. The lease was up. An eviction was coming. The fallout from the financial guillotine didn't take long to arrive. It started with a notification on my phone around midnight. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't a text asking if we could talk, it was an Instagram tag. I opened the app, my screen brightness lowered to save my eyes, but the glare of Brooke's audacity was blinding. She had posted a photo. It was a picture of the nursery in the lakeside estate, the room I had designed for the family I hoped Tyler and I would eventually have. The walls were hand-painted with a mural of the lake at twilight. The crib was a restored vintage piece made of walnut. In the caption, Brooke wrote, "Finally getting the nursery ready for baby. Tyler, so grateful my son will grow up in his daddy's house. No one can take this legacy from us. Boy-mom legacy justice." She had tagged me. She was publicly claiming my home, my design, and my dead husband's name, all while painting herself as the victim of a siege I hadn't even publicly acknowledged yet. The comments were already rolling in a chorus of sycophants and bots congratulating her and asking vague, concerned questions about the family drama she was hinting at. She liked every comment that painted me as the villain. It was a coordinated PR campaign launched from the guest bedroom of a house she didn't own. Then came the emails, not from my parents but from a lawyer they had clearly retained on contingency. The subject line was stark: evidence of paternity and estate claim. I opened the attachment. It was a PDF file thick with screenshots and scanned receipts. They weren't backing down. They were doubling down. The lawyer claimed to have proof of a year-long affair between Brooke and Tyler. There were text messages, grainy and lacking context, saved under a contact name simply listed as T. There were hotel receipts from a boutique in downtown. There were dates and times listed in a neat billable table. It was a meticulously constructed narrative designed to force a settlement. They expected me to look at this, crumble under the weight of the shame, and sign over the deed to avoid a scandal. I poured myself a glass of water and sat down to review the file. I didn't feel the sting of betrayal, I felt the cold detachment of a forensic accountant looking for a discrepancy, and I found it immediately. I looked at the dates listed on the hotel receipts. March 12th, May 4th, June 20th, August 15th. I opened my own calendar, the one I had kept religiously during Tyler's illness. March 12th, Tyler was in his 3rd round of high-dose chemotherapy. He had spent that entire week in the master bedroom, too weak to lift his head, while I fed him ice chips and read to him. May 4th, he was hospitalized for a fever that nearly killed him. I had slept in the chair next to his bed for 48 hours straight. August 15th, he was in palliative care, he couldn't walk. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow, but it wasn't grief. It was rage, pure and distilled. They weren't just lying about an affair. They were using his cancer, his suffering, and his dying days as the backdrop for their con. They were banking on the fact that a grieving widow wouldn't look too closely at the timeline of her husband's death. They had taken the most painful moments of my life and turned them into alibis for a fiction. I closed the laptop. The last thread of hesitation, the final microscopic fiber of guilt I felt about evicting my own parents, disintegrated. This wasn't family. This was a desecration. They had just declared war on a dead man, and they had no idea that the man they were lying about had left me the weapon to end them. I didn't reply to the email. I didn't scream into a pillow. I forwarded the entire PDF to the one person my parents feared more than bankruptcy. Catherine. Catherine was Tyler's aunt, his father's sister, and the only member of his family who had refused to attend my wedding. Not because she disliked me, but because she couldn't stand the sight of my parents. She was a corporate litigator who specialized in hostile takeovers, a woman who viewed emotions as inefficiencies in a contract. When Tyler died, she had handled the estate with the warmth of a glacier, ensuring every penny was locked down. I had thought she was cold then. Now I realized she was just prepared. We met 2 hours later in her corner office, 40 floors above the city. The view was breathtaking, but neither of us looked out the window. We looked at the file on her glass desk. Catherine flipped through the printed screenshots of the text messages my sister had fabricated. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. Amateur hour, she murmured, sliding a page across the glass. Look at the timestamps. This text was supposedly sent at 3:00 in the afternoon on a Tuesday. Tyler was in surgery that day. I was in the waiting room. They didn't even bother to cross-reference his medical chart. It's lazy fraud, Destiny, but it's still fraud. She leaned back, steepling her fingers. They are betting on a settlement. They think you will pay a few hundred $000 to make this go away to protect his reputation. They don't know I'm the executive, and they certainly don't know about the vault. So I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy sealed envelope I had retrieved from the safe deposit box that morning. I placed it on the desk. It made a heavy final sound. This wasn't just a medical file. It was the history of a genetic curse. 3 years before he met me, Tyler had been diagnosed with a rare dominant genetic marker. It was a killer. It was the same condition that had taken his father at 45. The doctors had told him that natural conception was a game of Russian roulette with 3 bullets in the chamber. Any child he fathered naturally had a 75% chance of inheriting the condition, which would require immediate invasive fetal intervention to survive past the 2nd trimester. Tyler had made a choice. He had undergone a surgical procedure to ensure natural conception was impossible. He had sterilized himself to stop the gene. Then he had banked his biological material in a high-security cryo facility in Zurich, with explicit instructions that it could only be released for IVF procedures, and only with the biometric authorization of his legal wife, me. I watched Catherine read the file. I watched her eyes scan the surgical reports, the cryobank contracts, the genetic screening logs. I watched the realization dawn on her. Brooke wasn't just claiming to be pregnant by a dead man. She was claiming to be pregnant by a man who had been medically sterile for 5 years. She was claiming to carry a child that, if it were truly his, would be fighting for its life right now, requiring specialists she hadn't seen and treatments she didn't know existed. Catherine closed the file. For the first time since I'd known her, she smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a shark sensing blood in the water. They have walked into a bear trap, she said softly. If they claim natural conception, the medical records prove it's impossible. If they pivot and claim IVF, the biobank logs prove they never had access. Either way, they aren't just lying. They are attempting to steal an estate using a non-existent medical reality. That is a felony. She picked up her phone. Let's schedule the deposition. I want to look her in the eye when she purges herself. The deposition room smelled like lemon polish in desperation. My family sat on one side of the mahogany table, a united front of entitlement. My mother, Patricia, held Brooke's hand, rubbing her knuckles as if soothing a war hero. Brooke sat in the center wearing a pastel maternity dress that highlighted the curve of her stomach, looking every inch the grieving secret lover. Her lawyer, a man who charged by the hour and clearly didn't ask enough questions, slid a document across the table toward Catherine. He spoke with the confidence of someone who had never lost. He demanded the immediate transfer of the Lakeside estate title to Brooke along with 50% of the liquid assets in the trust totaling $1.5 million. He called it a settlement to avoid the embarrassment of a public paternity trial. He called it doing the right thing for Tyler's son. I watched them. I didn't feel the urge to interrupt. I felt like a scientist watching bacteria under a microscope, observing their movements before applying the bleach. Catherine picked up the demand letter. She didn't read it. She set it aside and looked directly at Brooke. She asked one question, her voice deceptively light. She asked if Brooke was asserting that the child was conceived naturally through a physical affair. Brooke didn't hesitate. She looked me dead in the eye, a tear perfectly timed to pool in her lash line. She said yes. She detailed nights at the hotel, stolen moments. During his treatments, a love so powerful it defied his illness. It was a disgusting, elaborate fiction performed with the conviction of a sociopath. Catherine nodded. Then she opened the file we had prepared. She didn't slide it across the table. She held up a single page. It was the surgical report from 5 years ago. She read the summary aloud. Complete irreversible vasectomy and tissue removal, medically sterile. The silence in the room was absolute. My father's face went grey. Brooke blinked. The tear drying on her cheek as her brain scrambled to rewrite the script. Her lawyer grabbed the paper, reading it with widening eyes. But Brooke wasn't done. She was a cornered animal, and she did exactly what we expected. She pivoted. She stammered that she had been embarrassed to admit it, but they had gone to a clinic. She claimed they had used frozen samples. She claimed Tyler wanted a baby so badly he had arranged a secret IVF procedure to surprise me. Catherine smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who just heard the trap snap shut. She pulled the second document from the file, the logs from the Zurich cryobank. She explained the security protocols. She explained that Tyler's biological material was stored in a facility that required retinal scans and dual-key authorization. She explained that the access logs showed zero activity in the last 3 years. No withdrawals, no inquiries. The samples were sitting in liquid nitrogen, untouched thousands of miles away. Then came the final blow. Catherine leaned forward. She explained the genetic marker. She explained that if the baby in Brooke's womb was truly Tyler's, it had a 75% chance of carrying a dominant lethal gene. She explained that without immediate specialized fetal intervention treatment, that Brooke's medical records showed she had not received the fetus would be in critical distress right now. Catherine dropped the file onto the table. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Brooke was attempting to defraud an estate by fabricating a medical impossibility. She wasn't just a liar, she was a criminal, and we had the transcripts to prove it. Brooke didn't cry this time. She looked at her lawyer for help, but he was already packing his briefcase, distancing himself from the radioactive fallout of her lies. My parents looked at me, waiting for me to save them, to tell them it was a joke. I just looked back, cold and unmoved. The trap was empty. The game was over. Now all that was left was the sentencing. The court-ordered DNA test was a formality, but Catherine insisted on it. She wanted the final nail in the coffin, the incontrovertible proof that would clear Tyler's name forever. The results arrived in a sealed envelope delivered by courier to my new apartment. I didn't open it alone. I waited for Catherine. We sat in her office, the same place where we had dismantled Brooke's lies weeks before. Catherine opened the envelope with a letter opener, slicing through the paper with surgical precision. She scanned the document, nodded once and handed it to me. 0% probability of paternity. The baby wasn't Tyler's, it wasn't a miracle, it wasn't a secret IVF baby, it was just a lie. A DNA cross-reference, something Catherine had quietly ordered, suggested a match with an ex-boyfriend Brooke had dumped 6 months prior, a man she had publicly called too poor to date. The hearing was short. The judge reviewed the medical records, the cryobank logs, and the DNA results. He dismissed Brooke's claim with prejudice, meaning she could never bring it up again. He also referred the case to the district attorney's office for potential fraud charges. Brooke didn't scream, she didn't fight. She just collapsed into her chair, realizing that the golden ticket she thought she was carrying was actually a subpoena. But the real ending didn't happen in court. It happened at the gate. 2 days later, my phone alerted me to activity at the front gate of the Lakeside estate. I pulled up the security feed. My parents' car was idling there. Brooke was in the back seat. They were buzzing the intercom repeatedly. I drove out to meet them. I didn't open the gate. I parked my car on the inside, leaving the iron bars between us. I walked up to the keypad. My mother saw me and rolled down the window. Her face was swollen from crying. "Destiny, please," she begged. "We have nowhere else to go. The lease on the condo is up. We can't afford a hotel. We're family. You can't leave us on the street." I looked at them. Looked at the people who had taken my money for years, who had lived in luxury while I slept in a garage, who had sided with a liar over their own grieving daughter because they thought she was the better investment. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel anger. I felt nothing. I slid a manila envelope through the bars of the gate. It contained a copy of the DNA results. It contained a copy of the fraud investigation report. And it contained an eviction notice, legally served, giving them 30 days to vacate the premises. Before the sheriff arrived to remove them, "The baby isn't Tyler's," I said, my voice calm and steady. "The house isn't yours. Get off my property." My father started to shout, his face turning red, blustering about rights and respect. I didn't listen. I turned around and walked back to my car. Behind me, the electronic gate clicked shut, locking tight. It was the sound of a chapter ending. It was the sound of freedom. The for sale sign went up the next morning. I sold the lakeside estate for $3.02 million. I didn't haggle. I didn't care about maximizing the profit. I just wanted to liquidate the battlefield. That house wasn't a home anymore. It was a monument to a war I had already won. I couldn't live in a place where my husband's memory had been weaponized against me. I took the proceeds from the sale combined with the $1.5 million from the trust, and I didn't buy a yacht. I didn't hoard it. I planted it. I established the Tyler Project. It is a scholarship foundation for underprivileged architecture students, designed to find visionaries who see potential in broken places, just like Tyler did. But there is one specific clause in the foundation's bylaws written in ironclad legal ease by Catherine. No individual bearing my maiden name or with any proven biological relation to my parents or sister is eligible for a single cent. It is a legacy built specifically to exclude them. This was the final lesson I learned: the justice of the sewer. I realized that the best revenge wasn't leaving them homeless or watching them scramble for rentals. It was taking the resources they felt entitled to and using them to build a beautiful, thriving future that they were permanently banned from entering. I wasn't just cutting them off. I was growing a garden they would never be allowed to walk in. I live in Chicago now. My apartment is smaller, quieter, and filled with light. There is no white and gold here. There are no expectations. This morning, as I sat on my balcony watching the city wake up, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from a blocked number. My mother. I didn't read it. I didn't wonder if she was apologizing or begging. I swiped left and hit delete. The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was full. It was the sound of a life that finally belonged to me. I learned that blood is biology but loyalty is choice. If you've ever had to cut off a toxic family member to save your own soul, share this story. You are not alone.